Okay, guys, welcome back to another edition of Livewire. I am your host, Jared Moore, and Livewire is a program where we take your questions from the chat. On tonight's program, we are joined by Oneida tribal citizen Norbert Hill Jr. and Mvskoke citizen Lance Kelley, and we're going to be talking about Beyond Blood Quantum, Refusal to Disappear, a new anthology book that's out. And thanks so much for joining us tonight, guys.
Well, thank you for inviting us.
So to start off with, before we start talking about the book, I just want to give you guys an opportunity, each of you, to talk about your tribal affiliation and kind of your background so the audience can get to know you a little bit. And Mr. Hill, let's start off with you.
Okay, again, my name is Norbert Hill. I'm a citizen of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. I've been involved in education my entire career. I was also director of education for our tribe, a vice president, one of the tribal colleges, and now since then published 2 books on blood quantum. And so that's what I'm doing in retirement and trying to help tribal people make informed decisions about how we move forward.
And Mr. Kelley?
Yes, how you doing? Good evening, Hensei. That's probably one of the shortest intros that Norbert has done in a long time. So, but there's a lot more with him. I'll probably share that a little bit later. But welcome. Good evening. My name is Lance Paradise Kelley, citizen of Mvskoke Creek Nation, but also a descendant of Shoshone Paiute from Duck Valley, Nevada. But also a long time. Well, I mean, I grew up in Tulsa, went to OU. And long story short here, met my wife who happened to be from Oneida, and here I am 25 years later. Okay, but that's but seriously, I've been I have family in Tulsa. I'm back all the time. I'm not sure who's online, but throughout the years, I make it a very effort to still stay connected. And I think that's part of this discussion we're going to have later on tonight. But for all of us. And especially people who live beyond the reservation, as there was that. I know Mvskoke has done that in the last several years. But professionally, like Norbert, I'm a longtime 30-year educator. Started in Moore, Oklahoma, and then moved up here. And now I'm a professor at the local community college, which is on the Oneida Nation reservation. So I'll just leave it at that right now. And I'm not involved directly with the book. But my wife and my daughter had a chapter in it, and I've heard these conversations throughout the years, being close friends with Norbert from a different perspective, and we can get into that a little bit later. But that's kind of just a short summary.
I did forget to mention that I was the executive director for the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, and we have a lot of students from Oklahoma who are members and past members and professionals. And also, I was the director of the American Indian Graduate Center, and we managed the Gates Millennium Scholars. And I can't tell you how many scholars we had from the state of Oklahoma. So, that was part of. There's never so much fun as giving other people's money away to help kids go to school.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Hill, you were the co-editor of this anthology. Is that correct?
That's correct. My daughter, yes.
So give us an idea, what is the anthology about and what's in it?
Well, let me back up a little bit.
Okay.
The first job I had was in higher education, and I was in an interview. And one of the questions was, why are you an Indian? And I almost fell off the chair. And I said, well, it came with the body. And I wanted to ask, why are you a white man? Nobody ever asks white guys why are they white. And but I didn't know at that time that it was the seed for the anthology, but sometimes it takes a long time for seeds to germinate. And so we've been looking at that, and I've been serving on the trust and enrollment. We enroll new members into our new citizens into our nation, and we noticed that 50 to 60% of the people were quarter bloods. Quarter bloods marry out more than any other ethnic group in the nation. And so we're finding out that our populations are shrinking. We don't have families of 10 and 12 anymore. We have families of 1 and 2. And if you look at the demographics, we're shrinking, and we're not replacing our population. So we need to figure out how to reinvent ourselves. And that's what this book is about. And so our first book, um, I'll put it up here, The Great Vanishing Act, Blood Quantum and the Future of Native Nations, sold over 3,000 copies nationwide. There are over 450 tribes that are dealing with blood quantum in some fashion. And then now we have this new book, which was out about 6 months, and it's already sold over 1,500 copies. And so, you know, I underestimated how long community education is going to take, and it takes really a long time. And trying to get two Indians to agree is impossible because the other one just changed his mind. So here we are. And so, again, people need information to make good decisions. So that was the idea, is to get people on the same page if possible.
And I want to remind you guys too, watching this, if you want to buy the Beyond Blood Quantum book, there's a link to its Amazon page in the description of this video. You can go there to check it out. Mr. Hill, just to go into it a little bit further, so the anthology is citizens of different tribal nations, and I noticed that one of the names that I noticed was Joy Harjo contributed a poem. Could you talk a little bit about the contributors and some of the stuff, the submissions that you got, the essays?
Well, anthologies are difficult because it's like herding cats. You give them a June 1 deadline, and they don't start writing till May, and you're still changing them in July. So it's a challenge, but it's a book of several chapters, and Indians trying to find their voice. It's just not, I didn't write the whole book. I wrote chapters, and they're just different perspectives from a lot of people. Of course, Joy was on one of our summits, but she also contributed a poem. So there's different ways on how our people are doing it. So from the first book, the question was a blood quantum and the problem, and how did we get there? But that was in 2017. The conversation has shifted now, and we're talking about identity, belonging, community, and relationships. And that's where the conversation should be centered as we move forward and trying to figure out how do we reinvent ourselves. I don't see it as a problem. I see it as an opportunity. So that's what we're looking at. And then, Oklahoma has a special kettle of fish, and I'll let Lance talk about that because it's a little more complicated in Oklahoma, and I'm not the one to have voice for that. So somebody in Oklahoma has to do that.
Mr. Kelley, if you want to touch base on that.
Well, I mean, growing up in Oklahoma, we all probably have people who are literally 8 different tribes. And Norbert always says that, he goes, who's that person that 1/8, and they're not enough to be officially enrolled in their tribal citizens, being in their tribe. So, growing up in that perspective, but also having a different perspective, and this is kind of what Norbert and I and my wife and just various people here in Oneida, I tell them about being descendants, where we have 100,000 tribal citizens, and we all probably have family members who literally, from a racial standpoint, who look, white, African American, and Gavin a segment, but it's more than that now. And the direction that we're going. I mean, literally our tribe, but other tribes too in Oklahoma. And I'm pretty much. I talk to my friends and scholars and just friends throughout Oklahoma and in the country, and what is happening out there. I know tribes in Oklahoma, and Jerry, you could probably also chime in a little bit more about dual citizens now, and then
yes,
especially in the northeast western part of the state of Oklahoma, you have those tribes that they can be 2 or 3, and there are other examples like that. And Jared, correct me, were you at the TU? You sound like you were there.
I was not there. It was Thomas Jackson was there. Thomas was there, yeah.
But at that event, and I brought Norbert down just to kind of promote it a little different perspective, but it really opened Norbert's eyes and other people's, like he just said. I mean, Oklahoma has its own unique situation, and we've always had from 39 different tribes, an assortment of issues, and this is just one of them. So that's kind of the perspective I'm coming from. So I'll just leave it at that right now.
Okay.
Well, also, what complicates Oklahoma is you got 39 tribes, and some have land, some don't have land. You also have the freedmen issue, and so it's a little more complicated in Oklahoma, especially when you can be duly enrolled in 3 or 4 different tribes at the same time. So it's a it's a thorny issue and one that needs to be sorted out um, in order for us to survive.
Absolutely. And I wanted to let you guys in the audience know we mentioned TU there. If you don't know what we're talking about, on our webs on MvskokeMedia.com, we did a story, and it was in the newspaper too, from about a month ago about a talk that was held in relation to this book at TU, and Thomas Jackson was the reporter on that. So that's what we were talking about. We've got some questions pop up here, and I'm just going to jump into them real quick because I don't want them to get pushed out of the chat box. Mike TV asks, last night I had a member of the Oneida Nation call into my show and tell me I'm not really Indian because although I'm a citizen of the Creek Nation, I'm not associated with a quote-unquote clan. Is this a general sentiment of members of the Oneida Nation, or did I just speak with a bad apple?
Well, that's a kind of a loaded question. I don't know. What I do know is that, we're focusing now on our conversations in Oneida, and we have cultural orphans. And, whether they're inside the tribe or outside the tribe or living in California. And we're trying to figure out how to get them in a sense where they feel like they belong.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more than a per capita check. It's more than reading the tribal newspaper, but it's belonging. And somehow we're trying to figure out how to get these folks enrolled in a clan in our nation, and then find out where they fit, and then begin to teach them the responsibilities of the clan to the nation. And that's where you really get a feeling of belonging. We all know when we belong to something and don't belong to something, when we feel awkward. I use the example of Indian kids going to a mainstream college, first day of school. Indians feel like they're visitors, and white kids feel like they're part of the furniture. And so we got to figure out how we belong and when we belong. I use the example also when you want to see a group that feels like they really belong to something, watch the gourd dancers in Carnegie, Oklahoma on the 4th of July. There's a group that they belong with their heart. They're there. Their feet come off the floor. So there's other areas where you really feel like you belong to something, and you always feel a little awkward when you don't belong and you feel like you're an outsider. So, I think, as Lance talked about being a descendant of several tribes, you got a responsibility to know something about all of them, but mainly the one that you're enrolled in. He mentioned the poor kid in Oklahoma who's 1/8 of 8 different tribes and a full blood, but not enrolled anywhere. There's also a situation where you can have Ojibways, and there's 100 bands of Ojibways, and they could be, and so it's just not us marrying outside the tribe. We're marrying pilgrims that dilute the blood. But here we are, as we got the situation right now. So we're gonna terminate ourselves if we're not careful.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad, Mr. Hill, that you mentioned the college experience, because we have a question here on our chat. T.Y. Pearl's asking, how do you think the Supreme Court decision declaring race-based admissions unconstitutional may potentially impact blood quantum-based qualifications for tribal citizenship as a precedent?
Oh, geez, I'm not a lawyer.
And I should remind you guys, as you know from our Lawyered Up program, I'm not a lawyer either.
Yeah. I just think when kids go to college, I try to think about, instead of brain draining our communities, that we have people go home and they figure out how to contribute and build the nation. Some have an opportunity to do this, others don't. But I think it's a thing where the Trump administration has killed DEI, and so it's going to be more difficult. So we'll survive it. We need to hunker down, and it's a matter of getting. Many of our kids are simply underprepared. They're smart enough, but they're underprepared, and so they got to figure out where their allies are to help them get through the institutions, whatever they choose to do.
just to add to that, Jared, of course, attending college and then working at a college now, a lot of, what we have now is, people who have identified as Native, it's self-reporting. A lot of times, a lot of those type of scholarships, where you get into the, Pacific, is where the Oneida tribe, even Mvskoke Creek, which I think I got $50 for books when I was at OU. Okay, I'm not sure what it is now, but it's not really much. But Oneida definitely sponsors, scholarships for their citizens. So that it's a big spectrum there and everything in between. But when he's talking about the specific case comes into play, I think that applies only to those federal dollars, which are most of the time very open anyway. I mean, we can't, once we get scholarships, and I don't work in the area, but I kind of deal with sometimes, we don't know who they are. And we, the old cliche back in the day when I was in school and still around is, the checkbox Indians, who just did that for purpose. And they had no connection, as Norbert has talked about throughout the years. All they knew was someone was Indian in their family and they could apply for a scholarship. I remember having these talks, in the 80s and 90s with my, colleagues at school, just students and so forth and so forth. So it's been around for a little bit.
Okay. We've had some questions pop up here, and this is another lawyer type question, but T.Y. Prohl's asking, are the Rogers and or St. Cloud tests for determining Indian status under federal law good, bad, or indifferent standards?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with it.
All right. Well, and just for you guys, the Rogers and St. Cloud tests are legal tests that federal courts used for them to determine whether the person they're trying to crime on is an Indian or not. We've had another question here pop up. T.Y. Prohl asks, is an Indian a political or racial subdivision under the law? Are we nations or races?
Okay, so it's political, it's legal, it's cultural, it's all those things. Are we members of a club that get benefits like at Costco or Sam's Club or McDonald's and get benefits, or are we citizens of a nation that has responsibility? And if we're citizens of a nation that has responsibility, what is that responsibility? And that's what we should be talking about. And so the benefits that we receive, especially in gaming tribes, are both a blessing and a curse. So some people are just interested in benefits, but that's not going to work. So if people remember anything, it's blood quantum is not sustainable over time. It's just not going to work. And if you look at your tribal enrollments, they're getting smaller and smaller. So every tribe probably needs to look at some demographers to help you understand what's going on with your populations. We have statistics. We know how many third graders we have. We know how many old people we have. We know we can do the arithmetic about statistics. But a demographer study is the calculus of populations. And it helps us do a little peek around the corner. Is it historic? Is it economic? Is it employment? Is it historic? Is it an out-migration of the nation, or is it in-migration? And economic. So you gotta look at those issues and to say, where is your nation going? And I can't look at 574 nations, but I'm concerned about the Oneidas. But we have some kids that are half Oneida and half Menominee, and they grew up with the Menominee tribe. They speak the language. They participate in ceremonies. They're culturally, and they belong to the Menominees, but they flip to become Oneidas for the benefits, and you can only flip once. So culturally, they're Menominee, but legally, they're Oneidas, and so that's really a conundrum.
And I think that's something similar to some tribes out in the Western tribes. I know family members and in-laws who have, who are Kiowa and Comanche, and they basically have done the same thing just because, one of the tribes provides services more and benefits. So you get into that dialogue question also that comes into play here. And I think we are going, as Mvskoke Creek Nation, I mean, what's going to happen now with the freedmen? Basically doubling our population. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's basically what I've seen out there and the numbers out there in that regard. So what does that really mean for us now? Even though for citizens Muskogee, even with 100,000, there were very limited services. Now I know you live on the reservation; it's a little different, and I'm all right because I understand that. I recognize I live off the reservation. I read the paper. I vote. I try to participate as much as I can from a cultural standpoint. When I'm back home, I do. But that's my choice. So what does it really mean? And that's kind of what Norbert's, that second edition of the book really talks about, is belonging. And what does it mean now? So that's kind of the deeper level question also.
Okay. We've had a question pop up here. T.Y. Prohl's asking about the Mvskoke Creek Nation, and I'm going to go ahead and ask it, but, like we had talked about, this is a broad issue over all the tribes, and this book covers a lot of different tribes. I guess we should mention how many different tribal experiences are represented in this anthology. Do you have like a rough number?
Oh, I bet you 40 to 50. I haven't counted. We have different writers, and they we talked about pretend Indians, we talked about adoptions, we talked about people belonging to multiple tribes, we talked about the legal issues, we talked about the Indian Reorganization Act, the IRA. So we try to provide the perspective, and in the Beyond Blood Quantum, the foreword was written by Phil Deloria, who's the son of Vine Deloria, and he puts it really in good perspective in terms of what we're dealing with here. So that helps to get people to understand the larger issue.
Okay. I'm going to ask the question from T.Y. Prohl, and if you guys want to jump in, go for it. T.Y. asks, do you believe Blood Quantum's restrictions on holding office in Mvskoke Nation are creating a crisis of a lack of competent leadership currently and in the pipeline of future leaders? And just so you guys know, there is a Blood Quantum requirement to serve in the government of the Mvskoke Creek Nation. So I believe if you're less than a quarter, you can't serve on the council, and I think it's a half for chief. I'd have to go look at the number for chief, but so the pool, like you guys were mentioning, the pool of people who could even serve in the government is getting smaller. So, do you think that causes a problem for the operation of the tribal government?
Lance, that's a Lance question.
Yeah, Lance.
Now this is totally my opinion. I'm not.
Absolutely.
This person who's asking these questions, dang, he gets some good questions. But I'd like to hear his opinion too. But I always knew my dad was on the council for a long time, and proudly served. And I had no problem with that. With the 1/4 requirement. To the point now, moving forward, I'm a believer where I think you do need to be there. You do need to be a citizen of the Mvskoke Creek Nation. And see, then you get into these issues now of what does it mean, again, we go below the 1/4 requirement. Now, serving leadership, that's a tough one. Right now, I feel like we can maintain that. When is that time coming down the road? I don't know. But right now, my opinion, I think I have no problem with that.
Okay. So Blood Quantum is the poison pill. There's no doubt about it. It is the poison pill. And so a lot of tribes are leaning towards lineage and descendancy. And so you can become washed out quite easily. And so we got to define about the leadership in terms of our tribe. We have to be a citizen of the nation, but when your tribal enrollment explodes, it affects benefits. It also says who governs. And if you have more people living off the reservation and have no stake in the homeland, if we don't have a homeland, we don't have a nation. And so we got to figure out how to address that issue of descendants or lineal descendants of that. I had a woman one time, she said, my son, she was complaining about her not getting a scholarship. And she said, I want you to know my son is 13th, 256th Cherokee, and he didn't get a scholarship. And I said, I was on the phone, and I said, ma'am, if he cuts himself shaving, how much blood is left? And I held the phone out here, and I was in New Mexico, and she was in Oklahoma, and I could hear her screaming at me. But he was a duly enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation. as a nonprofit at that time, I can't create citizens in anybody's tribe. Um, but what he didn't tell his mother, he was a lousy student, and so he didn't deserve a scholarship. But I had to consider him. But we're getting people who are washed out, and we got people who live in California who've never been to Wisconsin or to the reservation, and they want full rights. And so we got to figure out how to do it. I think we got three elephants in the room. One elephant is descendants, the other elephant is benefits, and the third one is time. Time is our greatest enemy, and so we got to deal with all those at the same time.
Okay. Laverne C. Kahukali Presley, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is asking, what book are you talking about? We're talking about Beyond Blood Quantum, Refusal to Disappear. There is a link to the Amazon page for the book in the description of this video. Let me see here and see if there... Oh, and also I wanted to mention for you guys and for the audience too, one of the things that came out of the recent Creek Nation Supreme Court decision in the Freedman case was that the phrase by blood needed to be removed from the citizenship process. So, one of the things that I was saying at the time when that decision came down was that if the Supreme Court is going to say that we can't use by blood in the Constitution due to the treaty that we signed, that's probably going to trickle down and apply to any requirements for anything else, So,
I just saw something on the internet yesterday. It's about the Navajo Nation and saying that blood quantum is illegal, and they're challenging it that way. And so, let me just read a quote from Senator Higgins in 1895. He said the following: "It seems to me one way of getting rid of the Indian question is intermarriage and the gradual fading of Indian blood. The whole quality and character of the Aboriginal disappear. They lose tribal traditions, language, songs, ceremonies. There is no longer any occasion to maintain tribal relations. Therefore, we can take our place along with white people." So they knew in 1895 how to get rid of us. And so blood quantum is not one of our inventions. We never, I lived in Colorado and New Mexico for many years. I had a house in Colorado and a home in Wisconsin. And so I tell young people, you can't run from who you are or where you came from, no matter how much you try.
Okay. We've had a question here. Mike TV asks, Lance, do you think your ancestors approve of our tribe upholding blood quantum, considering colonizers forced that on us after the Trail of Tears?
I mean, that's kind of what Norbert was talking about a little bit. Today, the bottom line is we as Native people, sovereign nations, we can decide for ourselves. And I think Mvskoke Creek Nation, whether you agree with it or not, with the decision last month, the Navajo Nation, and all the other 500 plus tribes, ultimately we can decide at the point now. 100 years ago, 90 years ago, when IRA, and Norbert, talks about that a little bit, in his book, that's when it was mandated. Basically, tribes had to set up a government, so forth and so forth. I think we're past that, and I think tribes have the ability, the political right. And someone mentioned earlier about, are we political or racial? We are seen as political entities in this country. In legal cases, the Supreme Court a couple of years ago with the Indian Child Welfare Act really was a powerful message to everybody that we are here as political entities. I mean, you had a conservative court rendering that decision. So, what he's talking about, that historically, I forgot what he said about, did my ancestors approve that or not? I'm not sure about that. But moving forward, and I think that's what the book talks about too, is we know the history. I mean, we can stay on that forever, but we got to move forward and what's going to happen in the future. So that's kind of the direction I want to talk about.
Some people don't understand how we got here. In 1934, the Congress passed the IRA, the Indian Reorganization Act. It was Depression, and they offered a lot of goodies for us to buy land back. They gave us some benefits that including self-governance. Some Indians call it the New Deal. Other Indians call it the Raw Deal. So in 1936, our tribe adopted the IRA constitutions, which would included all those things, but the government lawyers wrote a provision in there that included blood quantum. So the chiefs at that time in our reservation married the girl next door, and they were both full bloods. So somebody might have said at that time, this is going to be a problem, but it ain't going to be our problem. And here we are 2.5 generations later. This is what will happen to Oneidas. Right now, we have 17,000 citizens. In 2070, which is not that far down the road, is we'll have 10,000, a little bit more. And then we'll have 180 kids 18 and under. Half of those 180 will be under age 12. So we have 90 kids that are 18 to, let's say, 16 or 17. And so you can't use 80 kids to repopulate a nation. So it's a no-brainer that this doesn't work. And so we got to rely on what's going to happen to our populations. And, it's just not sustainable,
T.Y. Prohl's asking what percentage of Muskogee citizens are 1/4 or less blood quantum. I don't know the exact figure, but it's probably a large chunk. T.Y. Prohl. There used to be those statistics. If you went to the Muskogee Creek Nation election board, you could find those. I don't think those are up anymore, but if I find that, T.Y., I will post it in a stream or something in the future. So
if you have 100,000 citizens, how many live in Oklahoma or on the reservation? How many live outside?
Well, I think there is a large chunk that are outside of the reservation. I don't know for sure. Like the information that we have publicly available from the tribal government is not in depth. There's no census that's conducted internally at the tribe, which is something that I've been advocating for us to do for a long time. And I also kind of one of the issues that we're talking about too in relation to blood quantum is the separation between what would be your political affiliation or from the federal government's version of whether you're a native or not, and then your personal or your own belief systems, right? So there's kind of a deviation there. So, as far as, because when the federal government conducts the census, they just ask you the question and you can self-identify. You don't have to provide your CDIB card. And then even with the CDIB cards, as you guys know, there's a lot of problems with CDIB cards. So that's another issue. I'm curious, though, at the Oneida Nation, how does the Oneida Nation determine their citizenship? Do they go back to, like, the blood quantum that is on the CDIB card, or what does that process look like at the Oneida Nation?
We go back to our historic rolls in 1897 and also in 1965 to see if your grandmother or anybody is duly enrolled, and we work from those bloodlines to see what their blood quantum might be. So what we noticed is that 60-70% of our people were quarter bloods. They were all marrying out, so we just saw that this is dangerous, that we really got to do something about it. We should have had this conversation 40, 50 years ago.
Those roles, were those conducted by the federal government or those internal tribal roles?
At the behest of the government, I guess at the behest of the federal government, yeah. So they could figure out how to give out benefits. That's what they were trying to figure out, that the larger tribes got more benefits than the smaller tribes.
Okay. Let me see here if there's some questions. We are at 34 minutes, guys, and normally we wrap around 30 minutes. So I'm going to look and I'm going to pick one more question and then we'll wrap up. I do encourage you guys to check the book out. The link is in the description, and if you like it, buy it. Let me see here. I'm going to ask this last question here from T.Y. Prohl. Do you think it's hypocritical that the Mvskoke Nation supports removing blood quantum requirements from the Stigler Act and Johnson O'Malley federal laws and programs, but keeps it in tribal law?
Man, I guess that's for me again. But once again, I'm not legal analysis of
Right.
this.
Yeah, right.
I mean, he needs to, and seriously, find out about some of these legal aspects. How the Oklahoma acts, the different acts throughout our history, definitely impacted who we are today. Um, moving forward, in the McGurk case, I mean, we just go down the list here. And going back to kind of full circle again. I mean, as Norbert said, at TU, he recognized this, that Oklahoma is this outlier. We have our own unique situations. I mean, in every capacity, um, and it's a book within a book, and all the different issues that we are facing. Not only all the tribes, but Mvskoke Creek and every other tribe. And earlier Norbert or someone said, to this day, I've been here 25 years in Oneida, but I live here, but I'm from Oklahoma. Proud of it, all that stuff. And this is kind of where I'm a little bit involved with this. This from outside, and like I said earlier, one of the chapters in the new book is my wife and my daughter, and they wrote about being multi-tribal. My daughter's 6 different tribes. She talks about that being, what does that mean? And one of her first things she talks about was she remembers driving Oklahoma as a kid, and we did. I mean, literally, the times, and I still do. And but what does that mean as parents too? We made it a conscious effort to make sure she was able to connect with her other tribes, her Oklahoma tribes, and her family down there. And we have a lot of family down there, all across the state. So that's part of this discussion too, moving forward.
So we had a chapter about corn. Corn is important to Oneidas and maybe other tribes too. But corn is more than a bowl of soup, And one of the chapters we talked about corn belonging in sovereignty. Buffalo is more than a burger. You talk to the Plains tribes who relied on the buffalo for many reasons, and cultural and ceremonial and other ways. And so you just can't single out. There's many layers of identity and belonging that go along with that. My grandson, who was 6 years old last Christmas, asked me, "Grandpa, why can't I be an Indian?" And that was the hardest questions I've had in a long time. And I said, well, I can't explain IRA to them. I can't explain identity and belonging. He's just not an age to understand that. So we got to make a place for our young people moving forward. And at the same time, we might save ourselves.
All right. I think that is a great note to end on. And I wanted to thank you guys for joining us tonight. It is a complicated and like a hedge maze type of subject, and it's different for every tribe because every tribal government is different and so on. So thanks for coming in tonight, guys, and joining me, and I appreciate the discussion. And thanks to all you guys out there watching in the chat. You guys are asking some great questions as usual. And going forward for the channel, I wanted to remind you guys that next week is early voting starts on the 5th and the 6th for the runoff election. Election day is the 8th, so don't forget to get out and vote. And also, this Saturday on the 1st, there is going to be a ceremony at the Council Oak in Tulsa that's going to have the city of Tulsa giving the Council Oak property back to the Creek Nation, supposedly. So I'm going to be there and doing a story on it. But if you guys want to come down and if you're in the Tulsa area and check it out, it's going to be a historic day. And with that being said, Mado, Hadam. Chihichat, please.
Yeah.